Welcome back to another rainy night. Let the gentle sound of raindrops falling outside slowly carry you into the peaceful darkness of your room. It doesn't matter where you're listening. You might be lying in bed, sitting in your car, or relaxing in the quietest place you can find. It also doesn't matter when you're listening. Whether it's late at night or during the fading light of the afternoon, this moment is yours. Close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your body relax completely, and allow tonight's horror story to gently guide you toward a peaceful and comfortable sleep. Tonight is a night to remember. A night where the line between reality and dreams slowly begins to fade. A night where the darkness is no longer something to fear, but instead becomes a warm, comforting blanket that gently lulls you to sleep. If this is your first time here, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe so you never miss another rainy night story. And now, relax, get comfortable. Let's step into tonight's story together. I've never told this story anywhere public before, and honestly, typing it out now, my hands are a little unsteady, because I haven't let myself think about all of it in order like this since it happened. But I think it's time. I think I need to say it out loud, even if it's just to strangers on the internet, because carrying it alone for a year hasn't made it feel any smaller. I'm Emily. I was 19 that fall, a freshman at a state school in the Midwest. I won't say exactly which one, for reasons that'll make sense. And it was my first real semester living away from home. I'd grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, where my mom still called me M-Bug, a nickname so private and so specifically hers that I'd have been embarrassed if anyone at school ever heard it. I bring that up now because you need to hold on to it. You'll understand why later. I want you to understand what that kind of homesickness actually feels like, because it matters for everything that follows. It's not just missing your bed or your mom's cooking. It's this low, constant hum underneath everything. Walking across a campus of 18,000 strangers and feeling like you don't exist yet. Like nobody there has any history of you at all. I cried more that first month than I had in years. I called my mom most nights just to hear her voice say my name. The real one and the nickname both, just to feel like I was still someone specific to somebody. I hadn't planned on moving mid-semester. I'd started the year in a triple down the hall. But in mid-October, a spot opened up in room 214, a double, on the second floor of one of the older dorms on campus, a building put up sometime in the 60s that still had the original radiators clanking away in every room. My RA, a senior named Marissa, told me the spot had opened because the previous occupant of that bed had needed to leave suddenly. And when I asked why, she did this small thing with her mouth, not quite a wince, not quite a smile, and said, "Housing stuff, you know how it is," and changed the subject to what time I wanted to move my boxes over. I didn't think much of it. Kids transfer rooms, drop out, go home for family stuff. It was the end of October, midterms were bearing down on everyone, and half the floor seemed one bad week away from some kind of breakdown anyway. My new roommate, Priya, was kind in a quiet, keep-to-herself way, already deep into her own pre-med workload, and she helped me move my stuff in that Thursday evening without much conversation beyond logistics. Which drawers were free, where the extra blanket was, that kind of thing. The bed assigned to me was the one against the inner wall, away from the window, old dark wood frame that had clearly outlived a dozen students before me. As I was making it up that first night, running my hand along the headboard to smooth the sheet, my fingers caught on something. A series of small notches cut into the wood near the top corner, close together, evenly spaced. The kind of marks you'd make counting off days on a wall in an old movie. Tally marks. I counted them without really meaning to. 11 of them, in a tight little cluster, like whoever made them had stopped abruptly partway through a 12th. I asked Priya about it, half joking, holding my phone flashlight up to the wood. She glanced over just long enough to see what I meant. And something crossed her face. Not quite fear. More like she was recalculating whether to say something and deciding against it. "Yeah, I don't know," she said. "The girl before you did that, I think." She left kind of suddenly. She said it the exact same clipped way Marissa had, right down to the word "suddenly," and then immediately asked me if I'd brought a power strip, because the outlet situation in that room was apparently a nightmare. And I laughed and let it go. Because 19-year-olds carve things into furniture all the time. It didn't mean anything. I told myself that firmly enough that I actually believed it, at least for that first night. I fell asleep around midnight, tired from moving boxes, and woke up sometime after 2 to a sound I couldn't immediately place. A slow, rhythmic creaking, coming from somewhere inside the wall behind my headboard. Even, spaced, almost like breathing. I lay there in the dark, telling myself, very reasonably, that the building was 60 years old, that old radiator pipes clank and groan all night in the cold, that I'd probably be hearing sounds like this constantly for the rest of the semester and would stop noticing them within a week. I believed it enough to close my eyes again. Then, around 3, the hallway light outside our door, a long fluorescent tube, the fixture already buzzing faintly even in daylight, started flickering. Not the lazy flicker of a dying bulb, a pattern, on, off, pause, on, off. I watched the thin strip of light under our door pulse like that for what felt like a full minute, my heart picking up in a way that had nothing rational behind it yet. And then it just stopped, settled back into its normal dim, steady glow, like nothing had happened at all. I didn't sleep much after that. But by morning, with sunlight actually coming through the window, and Priya already up getting ready for an 8 a.m. lab, the whole night felt distant and faintly embarrassing, the way fears always do once daylight strips them of their power. Old building, old pipes, old wiring. I got up, got dressed, and told myself that was that. I had no idea, that morning, that 11 marks on a headboard were about to become the least strange thing in that room. By the end of that first week, I'd mostly stopped thinking about the marks on the headboard at all. That's the thing about fear in a new place. It competes with everything else you're carrying, and midterms have a way of flattening out anything that isn't due Tuesday at 9 a.m. I had a chem exam, a paper on the progressive era, and a roommate who kept the lamp on until 1 in the morning, highlighting anatomy flashcards. And against all of that, a few creaky pipes and a flickering hallway light just didn't hold much weight in my head. But the second week, the footsteps started. Not constant, not every night. That's important, because if it had been every night, I think I would have done something about it sooner. Gone to Marissa, made a bigger deal of it. Instead, it was maybe every third night, always late. Somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, and always the same pattern. Slow, even footsteps coming down the hallway outside our door. Unhurried in a way that didn't match anyone stumbling back from a party or a late study session. They'd get louder as they approached. And then, right outside our door, not past it, not continuing down the hall to the stairwell, they'd simply stop, and then nothing, for a long time. I want to try to describe that nothing accurately, because I don't think I've ever managed to explain it to anyone in a way that captures how it actually felt. It wasn't just silence. The dorm was never fully silent. There was always some hum of pipes, or a door somewhere, or someone's music through a wall. This was different. It was like the hallway itself went still, holding something, the ambient noise of the whole building, dropping out for exactly as long as I lay there, straining to hear anything at all. I'd count my own heartbeats in my ears. I'd watch the door, waiting for a shadow to break the thin line of light underneath it. It never did. And after some stretch of time, I could never accurately measure. 2 minutes, 10, I genuinely don't know. The stillness would just release, and the ordinary night sounds would come back. And I'd realize I'd been holding my breath the whole time. I asked Priya, the first time it happened while she was still awake, if she'd heard it too. She was quiet for a second too long before she said, "Sometimes. It's probably just Jake from 216. He keeps weird hours." I wanted so badly to believe that. Jake from 216 became my go-to explanation for 2 more weeks, right up until I actually met Jake from 216 at a floor meeting and realized he was maybe 5'6" and walked with the quick, light, slightly awkward gait of someone who'd clearly never once in his life produced footsteps that sounded like that. Slow, heavy, deliberate, like someone pacing rather than passing through. Somewhere in that same stretch, I started noticing something about myself that unsettled me more than the footsteps did, if I'm honest. I'd started keeping a mental tally of how many nights I'd slept in that room. Not on purpose, not written down anywhere. Just an automatic count that ran in the back of my head every morning, the way you might absently count stairs. 14 nights. 15. I don't know exactly when I first thought to compare that number to the notches on the headboard, but once I did, I couldn't stop doing it. The morning I hit 16 nights, I got down on my knees by the bed and actually counted the marks again with my phone flashlight, needing to be sure I'd miscounted the first time. 11, still 11. I told myself that was good. That was reassuring. A coincidence broken. Proof that my brain was just pattern matching out of anxiety, the way brains do. I held on to that relief for exactly 4 more days. Around then, Priya started staying over at her lab partner's apartment more. She never said why, not directly. Always some version of, it's easier for the group project, or her place has better Wi-Fi. But I noticed she stopped leaving her things out on her side of the room the way she used to. Started keeping her bag packed, like she might not be back that night, even when she said she would be. I asked her once, straight out, half joking, whether the room creeped her out too. She looked at me for a second in a way I still think about. Something careful and a little sad behind it, and said, "You get used to it," which wasn't an answer to the question I'd asked at all, and we both seemed to understand that and let it sit there unaddressed. In our dorm's group chat, a sprawling, mostly ignored app thread, the whole floor was dumped into at the start of the year. Someone posted, out of nowhere, one. Tuesday night, a message that just said, "Does anyone else's room do the thing?" No context. A few laughing, crying emoji reactions. One LOL what thing. And then the original poster just wrote back, NVM, and never explained. I sat with my phone for a long time after that, thumb hovering over the reply button, wanting to ask if they meant 214, wanting to ask what the thing was, and in the end, I didn't send anything at all. I told myself it was probably nothing, some inside joke I wasn't part of. I don't fully believe that's what it was. I don't think I believed it even then. The last thing that happened that week, the one that finally made me stop explaining things away so easily, involved the little camera mounted above the stairwell door at the end of our hall. The kind every dorm has now, feeding into an app the RAs can pull up if there's ever an incident. I only found out about the footage because of what happened a few days later, which I'll get to. But I want to end this part here. On the night I actually saw something with my own eyes for the first time, rather than just hearing it. It was close to 2 in the morning, maybe 11 or 12 days after the footsteps first started, and I woke. Not from a sound this time, but from the specific prickling sense that I was being looked at. I lay still, eyes barely open, angled just enough to see the thin gap of light under our door. And for just a second, I want to be careful here. Because I've turned this over so many times, I no longer fully trust my own memory of it. I thought I saw the light break, not footsteps passing through it. Something standing directly in front of the gap, still, blocking it evenly on both sides. The way you'd stand if you were facing a door head-on, rather than walking past it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, I don't think, for a long, long time. And when I finally worked up the nerve to sit up and look properly, the light under the door was even and unbroken again, like it had never changed at all. I didn't sleep again that night. I lay there with my back against the wall, knees pulled up, phone gripped in one hand, like it was some kind of talisman, watching that strip of light under the door until the sky outside the window went from black to that flat, colorless gray that comes right before dawn. Priya wasn't there. Another night at her lab partner's. And I remember feeling that absence more sharply than I had before. This specific, physical loneliness of being the only person who could confirm whether something had actually happened or not. In the morning, I did the thing I probably should have done 2 weeks earlier. I texted Marissa and asked if I could talk to her, not in the group chat, just her. She met me in the common room on our floor that afternoon. The two of us sitting on a sagging couch that smelled faintly of someone's old microwave popcorn. And I told her everything. The footsteps, the pause outside the door, the shape in the light, even the marks on the headboard, feeling more and more ridiculous with every sentence. Watching her face for the moment she'd tell me gently that I needed more sleep and less caffeine. That moment didn't come. Instead, she got very still, in a way that made my stomach drop before she'd said a single word, and asked me quietly, "Has anyone said your name? Like, actually said it? Not just, like, called out or whatever?" I told her no, nothing like that. Just the footsteps, the stopping, the shape. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away as good news, temporary good news. And then she told me something that I don't think she was supposed to tell me, given how carefully she chose each word. The student who'd had that bed before me, a sophomore, she said, though she wouldn't give me a name, had put in an emergency room transfer request in the middle of the night, 2 weeks before I moved in, and had refused to explain why to anyone in housing, beyond saying she couldn't sleep in there anymore. Marissa said the transfer had gone through unusually fast for October, which apparently never happens. Housing changes normally take weeks of paperwork, except this one had been pushed through in under 48 hours. No questions asked on the official record. I asked her, straight out, if this had happened before. If room 214 had a reputation. She hesitated long enough that I understood the hesitation itself was an answer. And then she said, carefully, that dorms this old always had stories attached to them. That she didn't put much stock in any of it personally. That it was probably nothing more than an old building creaking and overtired students spooking each other in group chats. But she also said, and this is the part that stayed with me longest, that she'd checked the stairwell camera footage from the last week, just to put your mind at ease, in a tone that suggested she wanted to put her own mind at ease just as much as mine. She texted me 2 days later, on a Thursday, asking me to come by her room that evening. I remember climbing the stairs to her floor with a feeling I can only describe as dread mixed with relief. Dread at what she might show me. Relief that finally, someone else was taking this as seriously as I'd started to. She had her laptop open on her desk, the housing security app already pulled up. A clip cued and paused on a grainy black and white frame of our hallway, the stairwell door at one edge of the shot, our door, 214, visible near the other. I want to show you this, she said. But I also want you to know I don't totally know what I'm looking at. And she pressed play. The timestamp read, 14 a.m. A coincidence I noticed, and then made myself stop noticing because dwelling on it felt like it would tip me over into something I wasn't ready for yet. For the first several seconds, the hallway was empty, the fluorescent light steady, nothing moving. Then, at the very edge of the frame nearest our door, the picture seemed to catch. A brief smear of static, the kind of glitch you'd expect from an old camera on an old building's ancient wiring, lasting maybe 4 or 5 seconds. When the picture cleared, nothing in the hallway had visibly changed. No one had entered frame. No door had opened. And yet something about the light near our door looked different in a way I couldn't articulate, and Marissa couldn't either. Dimmer, somehow. In a small localized patch, right where I'd have sworn, 2 nights before, I'd seen a shape blocking the gap under the door. It does that a lot around your room, Marissa said quietly, not looking at me, still looking at the frozen frame. The glitch. It's checked the camera twice this semester. They say there's nothing wrong with it. We sat with that for a long moment, neither of us saying anything. The dorm around us full of ordinary evening sounds. A shower running somewhere. Someone's music thumping faintly through a wall. Laughter from the floor below. All of it feeling, for the first time since I'd moved into that building, like it was happening somewhere very far away from the two of us and that small glowing screen. I'm not saying it's anything, Marissa said eventually. I really don't think it's anything. But I'd feel better if you didn't sleep in there alone tonight. I didn't. I stayed on Marissa's floor that night, on a borrowed air mattress in a friend of hers' room, and slept better than I had in almost 2 weeks. But the next morning, walking back to 214 to get my things for class, I did the math without meaning to. The same automatic count I'd been keeping since the second week, 18 nights. And when I got down and checked the headboard one more time, heart already sinking before my fingers even found the wood, there were 18 marks cut into it now, not 11. The newest ones, so faint and shallow, they looked almost like they'd been made by someone pressing far too lightly, far too carefully, to want to be noticed at all. I stood there for a long time, with my fingers still resting on that wood, doing the thing you do when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are telling it. I counted again, and again. 18. Exactly, precisely 18. Matching the number of nights I'd slept in that room down to the day, including the 2 most recent marks that were so shallow, so faint, they looked less like they'd been carved than breathed onto the wood, barely a shade darker than the grain around them. I didn't cry, which surprised me at the time. I remember feeling something closer to a strange, cold clarity. The kind of calm that comes right before panic, when your body hasn't caught up yet to what your mind has already understood. I took a photo of the headboard with my phone, hands steady in a way that felt disconnected from the rest of me. And then I sat down on the edge of the bed and just stared at it for a while. Priya found me like that when she came back for her afternoon lab supplies. She took one look at my face, then followed my eyeline down to the headboard, and I watched something shift in her expression. Not surprise exactly, more like watching a thing she'd been dreading finally arrive. "You counted them," she said. Not a question. I asked her, as steadily as I could manage, how long she'd known. She sat down on her own bed across from me, pulling her knees up, and told me something I don't think she'd planned to tell me that day, or maybe ever. She said that back in September, before I'd moved in, her original roommate, the one who'd left so suddenly, had shown her the same thing. 11 marks, that time, matching 11 nights, exactly. Priya had told her, the same way Marissa had told me, that it was probably nothing, a coincidence. An old joke left by some student years back that just happened to line up. She'd believed that, she said, right up until the night her roommate woke her at 3 in the morning, shaking, insisting she'd heard her own name whispered from somewhere near the headboard, not shouted, not menacing exactly, just said quietly, the way you'd say something to someone you already knew was listening. She left the next day, Priya said. Didn't even wait for housing to sort the paperwork properly. Just took her stuff and went to stay with a friend off campus until they moved her officially. She looked at me for a long moment before adding, quieter, "I never actually heard anything myself. Not until you moved in. Now I hear the footsteps too. I just didn't want to say it out loud. Because saying it out loud makes it real, you know?" I did know. I understood that completely, in a way that made me feel less alone and more frightened all at once. Because if Priya, calm, sensible, pre-med Priya, was hearing it too now, then whatever this was, it wasn't just happening inside my own overtired head. That night, we made a decision together, sitting cross-legged on my bed with the lamp on and the door locked. Something we should probably have done from the very beginning. We agreed neither of us would sleep alone in that room again until we understood what was happening, or until one of us managed to get moved out entirely. And we agreed, at Priya's suggestion, to set up her old phone on a tripod she had for lab photography, propped on the desk facing both beds, recording overnight. The same way, though I didn't know this story yet, a woman named Rachel had once done in a cabin in Belgium, or a woman named Olivia had once done on a forest trail in France. I only learned later how many of us had landed on the exact same instinct, alone in completely different corners of the world, when words failed and cameras felt like the only thing left that might actually be believed. We didn't talk much after we set it recording. We just lay there in the dark, both of us awake. Both of us pretending for the other's benefit that we might actually fall asleep. Around 1, the pipes started their usual clanking. Around 1:30, the hallway light did its flicker, on, off, pause, exactly like the first night. And this time Priya squeezed my hand in the dark, hard enough that I felt her pulse hammering against my palm. Then, a little after 2, the footsteps started. Slow, even, coming down the hall toward our door. We both lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling, listening to them get closer, closer, and then stop, right outside, exactly like always. And this time, into that terrible, held-breath silence that followed. A voice, quiet, almost gentle, close enough that it felt less like it came from the hallway and more like it came from somewhere just on the other side of the wood, right at the level of my ear. Said a single word. M-Bug. I stopped breathing entirely. That name, that exact name, the one my mother had made up for me before I could even talk, the one no one on this campus, not one single person had ever heard me say out loud. Not Priya, not Marissa, not anyone. Priya felt me go rigid beside her and whispered, barely audible, "What? What did it say?" Which told me, with a horror that still sits in my chest when I think about it, that she hadn't heard it at all. Only I had. I don't know how long I lay there after that, frozen. Priya's hand still gripping mine, both of us staring at the ceiling like it might offer some kind of explanation. She kept whispering, "What did you hear? Em? What did it say?" And I couldn't make myself answer her right away, because some part of me understood that saying it out loud would make it permanently, irreversibly true in a way it hadn't quite been yet. Lying there in the dark, with just my own ears as witness. Eventually I told her, just the word, just that single, soft syllable and a half that belonged to exactly one person in my entire life, who wasn't standing, or wasn't anything, on the other side of that door. Priya didn't say it was nothing. I think that's the detail that scared me most, more than the word itself. She just held onto my hand tighter and said, very quietly, "Okay, okay, we're not staying in here anymore tonight." And we didn't. We grabbed our phones, didn't even bother with shoes, and left the room in our socks, walking fast down that hallway toward the stairwell. Both of us refusing to look back at our own door as we passed it. The way you don't look at something in a nightmare. Because some animal part of you believes not looking might mean it can't see you either. We spent what was left of that night on the common room couch, lights on, both of us wide awake. Priya's laptop open beside us, streaming something neither of us actually watched. Around 5, exhausted past the point of fear, I finally texted Marissa. "Can we talk first thing? Something happened." She met us at 7, before her own first class, still in sweatpants, hair pulled back, looking like she hadn't expected to be doing this so early, but had clearly been half expecting to be doing it at all. We told her everything. The marks matching exactly. Priya's old roommate hearing her own name months before, and now this, my name, the private one, spoken by something neither of us could see. I watched her face change while we talked. Somewhere around the part about the nickname, she stopped taking notes on her phone and just sat there listening. And when we finished, she was quiet for long enough that I started to worry she was building up to tell us, gently, that we both needed to see the campus counseling center, which honestly, I would not have blamed her for thinking. Instead, she said, "I need to pull the footage from your camera, and I think I need to talk to housing about that room's file. Properly this time, not just asking around." She came to find us again around noon, between classes, and her face when she sat down across from us in the dining hall told me before she said a single word that whatever she'd found hadn't given us a tidy explanation. "The footage from Priya's tripod phone," she said, showed almost exactly what the hallway camera had shown weeks before. A stretch of ordinary, empty room for hours, and then, right around 2:15, a burst of digital noise across the frame lasting several seconds. The kind of corruption that shouldn't happen to a modern phone camera recording locally with nothing to interfere with the signal. When the picture cleared, nothing in the room had moved. No shape, no shadow, nothing you could point to and say there. Just in the audio. And this was the part that made Marissa's hand actually shake slightly as she held her phone out to show us the waveform. A single word, clearer on playback than either of us had heard it live. Sitting right there in an otherwise silent 15 seconds of recording. Embug. She'd also gone to the housing office, pushed harder than she said she was technically supposed to, and pulled whatever records existed on room 214 going back through the department's digital files, which only went back reliably to the early 2000s. Anything older existed only in old paper ledgers nobody had bothered to digitize. In the current system, the bed I was sleeping in showed a clean, unremarkable history. Student names, standard transfers, nothing flagged, nothing unusual, right up until my predecessor's abrupt exit, which the system logged, blandly, as voluntary relocation, personal reasons. But there was one detail that made even Marissa's careful, reassuring tone falter. In the department's older paper archive, records she'd only been able to glance at because a sympathetic staff member let her off the books for a few minutes. There was a name attached to that bed from decades back, sometime in the 1970s, that had no corresponding exit paperwork at all. No transfer request, no graduation record, no withdrawal form, just a name and a start date, and then nothing. The file simply stopped. The way a sentence stops when someone walks away from a typewriter mid-thought. Marissa wouldn't tell us the name. She said she genuinely didn't think it would help. And looking back, I think she was probably right. Though at the time, I hated her a little for it. What she did tell us, quietly, leaning across the table like she didn't want anyone else in the dining hall to hear it. was that the staff member who'd shown her the file had mentioned, almost in passing, that it wasn't the only room in that building with a gap like that in its records. Just the one, she said, that seemed to get talked about the most. I want to be honest about something before I keep going. After that conversation with Marissa in the dining hall, I genuinely considered just going home. Not transferring rooms, going home entirely, taking a leave of absence, telling my parents I couldn't handle college yet, and letting them believe it was homesickness or stress. Because the actual truth felt too enormous and too unbelievable to say out loud to anyone who hadn't been in that room with me. I called my mom that night, sitting on the common room couch again. And I got about 4 sentences into some vague, sanitized version of events before I started crying too hard to keep talking. And she just stayed on the phone with me for almost 2 hours, not pushing, just present, saying my name, my real name, and once, near the end, without me even asking, the other one, the private one. Like she could tell I needed to hear it from the one person who was actually supposed to say it. I didn't go home. Priya talked me out of it, gently, the next morning. And I think part of what convinced me to stay was pure stubbornness. Some small, furious part of me that didn't want whatever was in that room to be the reason I gave up on the first semester of my own life. So instead, we made a plan. Marissa arranged an emergency room change for both of us, effective within the week. But there were still 4 nights left before the move. And for reasons that felt important at the time, and that I still can't fully explain, I decided that I needed to spend at least one more night actually in that room. Not alone. Priya insisted on that much, and Marissa, without either of us quite asking her to, said she'd stay in the room next door with her own door propped open, just in case. I think I needed to face it once, on purpose, rather than just running from a room that had already made its decision about me. That's the closest I can come to explaining it. I'm not sure it was a good decision. I'm not sure, even now, that it wasn't. We set up 2 cameras that night instead of 1. Priya's tripod phone again, and my own phone propped against a stack of books on the windowsill, angled to catch the door from a different side of the room. We left every light on except the overhead, just the desk lamp and a small plug-in nightlight Priya had bought that afternoon, casting everything in a low amber glow that felt, in retrospect, both comforting and completely useless. The first 2 hours were nothing. Not even the pipes, not even the hallway light. Just an ordinary, quiet dorm room. And for a while I let myself believe that, maybe, with witnesses and light and cameras, whatever this was simply wouldn't come, the way certain things are supposed to shy away from being seen too directly. Then, a little after 1, the hallway light started its flicker again. And this time, it didn't stop after a minute. It kept going. On, off, pause, on, off. For what felt like 10 full minutes. Longer than it had ever gone before. And underneath that erratic strobing I became aware, slowly, of a new sound layered under the pipes. Something I hadn't heard in that room before. A soft, dragging scrape. Like something being pulled very slowly across the wood floor of the hallway outside. Priya grabbed my arm. Neither of us said anything. We just watched the gap under the door, where the light kept stuttering in and out. And I remember thinking, with a strange, detached clarity, that I could see the shape of shadow gathering there, between flickers. Thin at first, then thicker, then thin again, in perfect rhythm with the light itself, like whatever was standing there was somehow tied to the flickering, cause and effect running in a direction that made no physical sense. Then it stopped. All of it. The light steadied. The dragging sound ceased. And into that silence, the real one, the held breath one. I'd learned to dread more than any noise. The footsteps started, slow, unhurried, coming down the hall exactly the way they always had, growing louder, closer, until they stopped directly outside our door. This time, I didn't wait for the word. I couldn't. Something in me, call it courage, call it a kind of desperate exhaustion with being afraid, made me get up off the bed before Priya could stop me, cross the room in 3 quick steps, and grab the door handle. Don't, she started, but I'd already thrown the door open. The hallway was empty. Fully, completely empty. The fluorescent light burning steady and ordinary above an unbroken stretch of beige carpet and closed doors all the way down to the stairwell where Marissa's door stood, propped exactly as promised, her own desk lamp glowing warm through the gap. But the air in that hallway, I don't know how else to describe this, was cold. Not draft cold, not window cold. A specific, localized, dense cold exactly at the threshold of our door. The kind that raised the hair on my arms in the space of a single step, and was simply gone, entirely gone, the moment I moved 2 feet further down the hall to check. I stood there in that spot for a long moment, arms wrapped around myself, staring at nothing, at an ordinary empty hallway that had, seconds before, produced footsteps with no feet behind them. That was when I heard my name again. Not whispered this time, not gentle. Closer than it had ever been, and clearer, coming from directly behind me, from inside our own room, from a doorway I had just walked through and left standing open. M-Bug. I turned around so fast I nearly fell. The room was empty. I want to say that plainly, because I've replayed that moment so many times since that I sometimes doubt my own memory of it. And I need to be honest about exactly what I did and didn't see. The desk lamp was still on. The nightlight was still glowing its low amber. Priya was still sitting exactly where I'd left her on the edge of my bed, both hands pressed over her mouth, eyes fixed not on me, but on something behind me, on the doorway I'd just come back through. "Em," she said, voice barely a breath. "Your camera." I didn't understand what she meant until I followed her eyes to the windowsill, where my phone sat propped against the stack of books, still recording, its little red indicator light steady. She wasn't looking at the room. She was looking at the phone screen itself, which she must have glanced at in the seconds I'd been standing in that cold spot in the hallway. And whatever she'd seen there had drained every bit of color from her face. I crossed the room and picked it up with hands that weren't entirely steady. And even now, describing this part, I have to stop and just sit with it for a second, because it's the part I understand least and think about most. On the phone screen, in the live preview, angled to catch the door, the same door I'd just walked back through, the same empty doorway I could see with my own 2 eyes when I looked up from the screen. There was a shape standing in the frame, indistinct, not sharply defined, more like a density in the air than a person exactly. Roughly the height and proportion of someone standing upright, positioned just inside the threshold, exactly where I'd been standing seconds before I'd stepped out into the hall. I looked up from the phone to the actual doorway. Nothing there. Empty air, ordinary carpet, the hallway light glowing steady beyond it. I looked back down at the screen, still there. I don't know how long I stood like that, phone shaking slightly in my hand, looking up and down and up and down, comparing a room that held nothing to a recording that insisted otherwise, before Priya finally grabbed my wrist and pulled me back, away from the door, both of us retreating until we hit the far wall, until there was nowhere else in that small room left to retreat to. The shape on the screen didn't move. It simply stood there, in that same doorway, for... I checked the timestamp afterward, sick with how calmly precise it had been. Exactly 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The number itself landing in my stomach like a stone the moment I saw it. 11 marks, 11 nights. A number that had been chasing me since the very first week without my ever choosing it. Then, on the recording. Not in the room. Never once audible in the actual air around us, only ever captured on that small glowing screen. The shape seemed to lean forward slightly. And the same voice, closer to the phone's microphone than it had ever been to my own ears, said the word one final time, drawn out slightly longer than before, almost tender in a way that somehow made it so much worse than if it had been angry. "Mbug!" And then it was gone. Not faded, not walked away. Simply absent in the next frame. The doorway empty on the recording exactly as it had been empty to our eyes the entire time. Like something had been switched off rather than left. I don't remember much of the next hour clearly. I know Marissa came running when Priya called out for her, that the 3 of us ended up crowded onto the common room couch again with every light in that space blazing, that Marissa watched the recording twice with her jaw tight and didn't say a single reassuring thing either time, which told me more than any explanation could have. What I do remember, with total clarity, is the one thing Marissa said before the sun came up. Staring at her own phone rather than at either of us, scrolling back through whatever records she'd managed to pull that week. "The name in the old file," she said quietly. the one from the 70s. I looked at it again tonight, after you called me. She hesitated so long I thought she might not finish the sentence at all. It's not a full name, just an entry, first initial, and a nickname, like someone who filled it out was in a hurry, or didn't know the rest, and I didn't think anything of it until just now. But she turned her phone around so we could both see it, the old scanned ledger page, faded ink, a single line near the bottom of a long column of ordinary full names. Bug. I didn't sleep at all that night, and I don't think Marissa or Priya did either. We sat there until the sky outside the common room windows turned that pale, ordinary blue of early morning, and none of us said very much, because there wasn't much left to say that didn't feel too large for the room we were sitting in. I moved out of 214 2 days later, ahead of schedule. Housing pushed the paperwork through fast, the same unusual speed. Marissa said my predecessor's transfer had gone through, no questions asked, like the building itself had learned, somewhere along the way, how to make these things move quickly when they needed to. Priya moved with me, into a new double on the 4th floor. Brighter, newer wing, radiators that didn't clank, a hallway light that never once flickered the entire rest of that year. I want to tell you, we found out who E was. That's the part of stories like this that always feels unfinished when I hear them. And I understand now, firsthand, exactly why they stay unfinished. Marissa tried. She went back to that sympathetic staff member twice more. And the second time was told, politely but firmly, that older student records, especially incomplete ones, especially anything predating full digitization, weren't something she had access to release. Privacy laws being what they are, even for names that might not belong to anyone still living. The trail just stopped there, the way the old ledger entry itself had stopped. Mid-sentence, no exit form, no explanation, just a first initial and a name that was never supposed to be written down anywhere official at all. Because nicknames like that only exist in the mouths of the people who love you. I've turned over the possible explanations more times than I can count, the way I think anyone would. There's the version I told my parents, eventually, softened way down, that the dorm was old, that old buildings creak and settle and produce all kinds of ordinary sounds, that overtired, homesick, anxious first years can build into something much larger than they are, that cameras glitch, that group chats spread rumors that plant ideas in people's heads before they even notice something's wrong. That's the version where none of us were ever really in danger, just susceptible in a very human, very explainable way, to the particular loneliness of being 19 and far from everyone who's ever known your real name. There's a colder version, one I think about on nights when I can't sleep, which is that some places simply absorb something from the people who live in them for long enough. Especially if one of those people left without ever getting to say goodbye to anyone. And that certain rooms just keep counting long after the person who started the count is gone, waiting for someone new to notice the number and without meaning to, agree to finish it. And there's a third one, the one I like least of all, which is the simplest, that somewhere in that building's paper past, a girl who went by Bug stopped existing in the record on a specific day in the 1970s, with no explanation anyone kept, and that whatever happened to her happened in a room with a headboard she may have marked herself, counting something the rest of us will never know the true number of. I don't know which of those is true. I'm not sure I want to know, if I'm honest. Some part of me has made peace with the not knowing, because the alternative, an actual, confirmed answer, feels like it would only make the whole thing more real than I can hold. What I do know is what it left behind in me, because that part isn't a theory. That part is just my life now. I still, more than a year later, cannot sleep with a completely quiet room. I keep a fan running year-round, even in winter, just for the white noise, just so silence never gets a chance to hold that specific breath-held quality again. I check the frame of every unfamiliar bed I ever sleep in now, hotel rooms, friends' guest rooms, anywhere, running my fingers along the wood before I ever let myself lie down. And I've never once told anyone why I do it, until right now. And I have never, not once since that October, let anyone new in my life learn my nickname. Not roommates, not close friends, not anyone. Only my mother still says it, and only when we're alone, and only in a voice low enough that it never quite leaves the room we're standing in. If there's a lesson I actually carry from all of this, and I've thought hard about whether there is one, whether a story like this is even supposed to have one, I think it's something small and unglamorous, the same way it were me, and for every version of this I've heard since. Some part of you always knows, early, when something is wrong, long before you're willing to admit it. Because admitting it is inconvenient, or embarrassing, or simply too large to fit into a Tuesday when you have a chem exam the next morning. I ignored that part of myself for 2 full weeks. I don't think I'll ever ignore it again, in that room or any other, for the rest of my life. I still think about Bug sometimes. I hope, whatever she was, whatever happened to her, that somewhere, somehow, she finally stopped counting. I've told this story exactly twice out loud, and both times I watched the other person's face shift from polite interest to something closer to pity, like they were waiting for me to admit I'd been drunk, or exhausted, or dreaming. I wasn't any of those things. I want to tell it here, in full, in order, because I think the order is the only thing that makes it make any sense at all, and even then, barely. I was 24 in the summer of 2022. About 6 weeks into a solo cross-country motorcycle trip I'd been saving for since college. I'd quit a job I hated, sold most of what I owned, and told myself this was the kind of thing you do once in your 20s, or you spend the rest of your life wondering. I was cutting through central Oregon on a stretch of state highway that wound up through the Cascades, a route some guy at a gas station had recommended as the pretty way, and it was dense pine forest, switchbacks, no guardrails, and half the places you'd want one. It was maybe 11 p.m. when my bike started sputtering. I want to mention, because it matters later, that I'd actually filled up 2 hours earlier at a station that had a hand-painted sign out front with a big number 3 on it. Some promotion, third fill-up free or something. I don't even remember exactly. I'd laughed about it at the time, joked to myself about lucky numbers. I didn't think about it again until much later that night. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. My bike died completely about a mile past the last turnoff I'd passed. No shoulder to speak of, just a narrow gravel pull-off barely wide enough for the bike itself. My phone showed 0 bars. A light rain had started, and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath. I made the calculation every stranded person makes at some point. Walked back toward the last town I remembered, or waited out until daylight and flag someone down. I chose to wait. In hindsight, I don't know if the other choice would have gone any differently. I sat there for maybe 40 minutes, huddled under my jacket, watching rain beat on my visor, before I saw the light. It was up on the hillside across the road, maybe a quarter mile off through the tree line. A flashlight beam, clearly, cutting through the dark, in a pattern too deliberate to be random. 3 flashes. A pause. 3 flashes again, over and over, patient, mechanical. My first thought was relief. Someone else out here, maybe a hiker in trouble. Maybe someone signaling for help, same as I would have if I'd had the battery to spare. I grabbed my own flashlight from my pack and flashed it back 3 times, feeling almost stupidly grateful to not be the only person stranded in these mountains tonight. The light on the hillside stopped immediately. Then, after a long pause, it started again, but faster this time. 3 flashes, quicker, tighter together, like it had heard me and adjusted. I remember sitting very still after that, rain ticking against my helmet, telling myself it was just someone matching my signal back, the natural thing 2 stranded people might do to find each other in the dark. That's all it was. That's all it had to be. I flashed my light back again, 3 times, slower this time, trying to signal something like, "Stay there, I see you, hang on." The response came almost instantly. 3 flashes, that same tightened rhythm, quicker than what I'd sent. It didn't feel like an echo anymore. It felt like the person over there was choosing to speed up, deliberately, like a conversation where one side keeps talking faster to close a gap the other side isn't ready to close. I told myself that was just how strangers signal each other in the dark. Nobody's perfectly in sync. Everyone's a little anxious, a little eager. I decided the smart thing to do was just wait. If someone was out there stranded like me, we'd find each other by daylight, or a car would eventually pass and we could flag it down together. There was no reason to go looking for a light on a hillside in the pitch dark, across a road, up through dense trees I couldn't see the shape of. For a while, nothing changed. The light kept its rhythm. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, steady as a heartbeat. And I sat there in the rain, listening to my own bike ticking as it cooled, feeling almost soothed by the pattern of it, like a metronome I could set my breathing to. I remember actually feeling a little embarrassed by how unsettled I'd been at first. 2 stranded travelers, both waiting out a long night in the mountains. It made sense. It was almost comforting, in a strange way, knowing I wasn't entirely alone out there. It was maybe an hour later that I noticed the light had moved. Not flickered, not shifted with the wind or a shaky hand. Moved, position on the hillside clearly lower and closer to the road than it had been when I first saw it. I sat up straighter, rain running down the back of my collar, and watched it flash its pattern again from this new position. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes. Same rhythm, different place. I told myself that made sense too. If someone was hurt or lost, they'd be moving around trying to find the road, trying to find me, same as I might do in their position. It was logical. It was, in fact, exactly what a stranded hiker looking for help would do. I flashed my light back once more, 3 times, and this time didn't get an immediate response. Just silence on that hillside, dark where the light had been, long enough that I started to second guess whether I'd actually seen it move at all, whether my eyes were doing something exhausted eyes do in the dark, finding patterns in nothing. Then it came back on. Same spot, same 3 flashes. I sat there for a long stretch after that. Genuinely, unnervingly long, maybe 20 minutes, during which absolutely nothing happened. No flashing, no movement. Just the rain and the trees and my own breathing, loud in my ears in a way it hadn't been before. I remember it being the worst part of the whole night. Somehow, worse than any of the flashing had been. That kind of silence where you start to feel like something out there is simply choosing not to move, waiting for you to relax enough to stop watching. I didn't stop watching. I couldn't have, even if I'd wanted to. The silence stretched long enough that I actually started doubting my own memory of the last hour, wondering if I'd imagined the movement, if exhaustion and cold and adrenaline had just been playing tricks, stitching together a pattern where there wasn't one. I remember checking my watch obsessively during that stretch, like watching the minutes tick by might somehow speed up whatever was supposed to happen next. 11:47, 11:52, 12:03, nothing. Then, right at the edge of the tree line, across the road, much closer than the light had ever appeared before, I heard something. Not a flashlight clicking, a branch snapping under weight. Then another. Slow, deliberate steps moving through underbrush, angled toward the road. I told myself it was a deer. Deer move through brush like that all the time, especially at night, especially in rain when they're less spooked by human scent. I'd grown up around enough woods to know that logic held up fine in daylight. It held up a lot less convincingly at midnight, alone, with a dead bike and no phone signal. The footsteps stopped right at the tree line, and for a moment, there was nothing again. Just rain. Rain, just my own pulse loud enough to feel in my throat. Then the flashlight came on again, and this time it wasn't up on the hillside at all. It was right there, at the edge of the trees, maybe 80 feet from where I sat straddling my dead bike. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 flashes. I could see, in the brief bursts of light, the vague outline of a person holding it. Tall, still, the beam angled slightly upward in a way that lit the underside of a face I couldn't make out any real detail of. Just enough to know it was a person, standing there, watching me the way I'd apparently been watching them for the past hour. "Hey!" I called out, my voice cracking a little in a way I wasn't proud of. You okay over there? You need help? Nothing. No response, no wave, no shift in posture. Just the light. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, endlessly patient. Like my question hadn't registered as words at all. Just more noise in a night already full of it. I called out again, louder this time, telling him I had a flashlight, that I'd flash back if he needed anything, that I was stuck to and we could figure something out together. Still nothing. Just that rhythm, unbroken, hypnotic in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up despite the cold already doing that job well enough on its own. I remember, in that moment, running through every reasonable explanation I could think of. Maybe he was deaf, and the flashlight was the only way he knew how to communicate distress. Maybe he was in shock, some kind of accident victim too disoriented to form words. Maybe, and this was the one I clung to hardest, he simply couldn't hear me over the rain, and the rhythm wasn't directed at me specifically at all. Just some automatic, panicked repetition a frightened person falls into when they don't know what else to do. I decided, sitting there shivering, soaked through, that the safest thing was to stay exactly where I was. Whatever this was, crossing that road toward a stranger who wouldn't answer me felt like the wrong move, and staying put, staying visible, staying near my bike felt like the right one. I don't know if that was actually true. I only know it's the decision that got me through the rest of that night. I sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 20 minutes, watching that light flash its rhythm from the tree line, telling myself over and over that staying put was the right call. The figure didn't move, didn't call out, didn't do anything except hold that same posture, arm raised, flashlight beam cutting through the rain in 3 quick bursts, then dark, then again. At some point, I noticed my own hands had started shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. I remember flexing my fingers, trying to work feeling back into them, trying to focus on something practical instead of the figure across the road. I checked my phone again. Still nothing, not even the SOS fallback. And I remember thinking, with a kind of detached, almost clinical clarity, that if something happened to me out here, it might be days before anyone found me. That thought should have scared me more than it did. Instead, it made me angry. In the specific way, fear turns to anger when you've been sitting still too long, doing nothing but watching something watch you back. I stood up off my bike, legs stiff, and called out again. Sharper this time, less a question and more a demand. What do you want? The rhythm stopped. For a second, nothing happened at all. And that absence of light felt so much worse than the flashing had. Then the beam came back on, but differently, not flashing anymore. Steady, held directly on me, unmoving, like he'd finally decided I was worth actually looking at. I couldn't see anything behind that light, except the vague shape of a person, tall, unmoving, rain visibly falling through the beam between us. And then, very softly, carried strangely clear across the distance despite the rain, I heard 3 words. You found me. I didn't answer. I don't think I could have, even if I'd wanted to. My throat had gone completely, and every instinct I had was screaming at me not to respond, not to acknowledge that voice at all. The light held steady on me for another few seconds, and then, just as abruptly as it had appeared, it clicked off entirely. Silence. Full dark across the road, the kind so complete I couldn't even tell if the figure was still standing there or had already started moving. I stood beside my bike for what felt like forever, ears straining for any sound, footsteps, breathing, branches shifting, and heard absolutely nothing. No rain even, for a strange suspended moment, like the whole hillside had gone still along with the light. Then, from directly across the road, close, far closer than the tree line where the figure had been standing, I heard 3 soft knocks. Not on wood, not on metal, on stone. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. The exact rhythm the flashlight had used all night. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks again. I didn't wait to hear a 3rd round. Something about that sound. Stone against stone. Precise, patient. Coming from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint in the dark. Broke whatever frozen calm had been holding me in place all night. I grabbed my pack off the bike, didn't bother trying to get it running again, and started walking, fast, back down the road the way I'd come. Away from the tree line, away from that steady 3-beat rhythm, still ticking along somewhere behind me in the dark. I didn't run at first. Some part of my brain kept insisting that running would mean admitting something was actually wrong. And I wasn't ready to admit that yet. I walked briskly, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, rain plastering my hair to my forehead, and for the first quarter mile, nothing followed. No footsteps, no knocking, just my own boots on wet asphalt and my breath coming fast and ragged. Then I heard it again. The knocking. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. Except now it wasn't coming from behind me at all. It was coming from somewhere off to my right, in the trees running parallel to the road, moving at roughly the same pace I was walking, like something was pacing me through the forest, just out of sight. That's when I started running. I don't remember most of that run in any coherent order, just fragments. Branches I couldn't see clipping my arms where the tree line pressed close to the shoulder. The specific ache in my chest from breathing too hard, too fast, in cold, wet air. The absolute certainty, at one point, that I heard something matching my pace exactly. 3 quick steps for every 2 of mine, like it was gaining ground effortlessly and simply choosing not to close the distance yet. I ran until my legs gave out, stumbling to a stop against a guardrail that had finally appeared at a bend in the road, chest heaving. And for a long, terrifying moment, I just stood there, listening, waiting to hear if anything was still coming. Nothing. No footsteps, no knocking, no rhythm of any kind. Just my own ragged breathing and the rain, which had softened to a light drizzle, and somewhere far off, almost impossibly welcome, the sound of an engine. I stumbled out into the middle of the road and waved my arms like a lunatic. And the truck, a battered old pickup, some rancher heading home late from wherever ranchers go at 2 a.m., actually stopped. The driver, an older man with a face like worn leather, took one look at me and didn't ask a single question before telling me to get in. I told him everything on the drive down, words tumbling out faster than I could organize them. And he listened without interrupting, jaw tight, eyes flicking to his rearview mirror more than once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before he said, in a voice that had gone strangely careful, "You're not the first person who's told me something like that about that stretch of road." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer right away. He just kept driving, knuckles a little pale on the wheel, and said only, "Some places just don't like being passed through at night." I didn't push him for more than that. Something about the way he said it, flat, final, like a door closing on a subject he'd already decided not to open further, told me I wasn't going to get anything else out of him that night. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. He drove me to the nearest town, a little place called Sisters, with maybe 4 streetlights total, and dropped me at a 24-hour diner, telling me the sheriff's substation was 2 blocks down if I wanted to report what happened. I didn't offer to come with me. He didn't linger. He just drove off into the dark like he wanted distance between himself and the whole conversation as fast as possible. I sat in that diner for almost an hour, hands wrapped around a coffee mug I didn't really want, working up the nerve to walk those 2 blocks. When I finally did, the deputy who took my statement was younger than me, and I watched his expression shift over the course of my story, from polite patience to something more careful, more focused. The look of someone who's heard a detail before and is trying not to show it. He asked me to describe exactly where I'd been stranded. And when I gave him the mile marker, as best I remembered it, he went quiet for a second before saying they'd send a unit out at first light to check on my bike and look over the area. He didn't explain why that particular stretch warranted more than the routine tow truck call I'd expected. I didn't ask. I think some part of me already understood I wouldn't like the answer. I waited at a motel the department found for me, and around 9 a.m., the same deputy came by to update me himself rather than calling. He said they'd found my bike exactly where I'd left it, untouched, still full of gas despite what I'd assumed the night before, which struck me even then as strange, though I was too rattled to fully process it in the moment. It wasn't out of fuel at all. It had simply died, and would apparently start again just fine once they checked it. What he told me next is the part I still turn over more than almost anything else. They'd walked the tree line across from where I'd been stranded, following the rough direction I'd described, and found, embedded in a flat shelf of exposed granite about 80 feet into the trees, 3 parallel gouges cut deep into the stone, evenly spaced, each one roughly the width and depth you'd get from something dragged hard and deliberate across rock, not natural weathering, not anything a geologist they'd consulted could easily explain. No footprints, no flashlight, no debris, no sign that a person had stood there at all, despite the ground being soft enough from the rain to hold a print for hours. Just those 3 marks, side by side, cut into stone that hadn't shown any sign of disturbance before that night, as far as anyone could tell. The deputy asked me, almost as an afterthought, whether the flashing pattern I'd described had been 3 flashes specifically, not 2, not 4. I told him yes. He nodded slowly, wrote something down, and didn't explain why the number seemed to matter to him at all. I asked him directly, standing in that motel parking lot, with my bike loaded onto a trailer behind his cruiser, why the number 3 seemed to mean something to him. He hesitated long enough that I knew he was deciding how much to say. And then he told me carefully that this wasn't the first report like mine from that stretch of road, that over the years, a handful of stranded travelers had described almost the exact same thing. A light on that hillside, a rhythm of 3, someone or something that got closer without ever seeming to hurry. He said none of those reports had ever led anywhere. No missing persons tied to the area, no bodies, no evidence beyond scattered, half-believed statements from people who mostly just wanted to forget it and drive on. He said it like a man reciting something he didn't fully believe himself, but had stopped being able to dismiss either. I asked if anyone had ever figured out what it was. He just shook his head and said, "Some stretches of road, you just don't stop on. That's all people out here really know how to tell you." I got my bike back 2 days later, running perfectly. No explanation for why it had died at all. The mechanic who looked it over found nothing wrong with it. No clogged line, no electrical fault, nothing that should have left me stranded on that shoulder in the first place. I finished my trip. I made it across the country like I'd planned. But I never rode through Oregon again after that. Not on that route. Not on any route that came within 50 miles of that particular mountain pass, even though it cost me an extra day of driving to avoid it. I've built exactly 3 explanations for myself over the years since, and none of them fully hold. Maybe it really was an ordinary stranded hiker, disoriented and frightened enough by his own isolation that his behavior read as something stranger than it was, and the marks in the stone were some coincidental geological feature that simply happened to look deliberate. Maybe exhaustion and adrenaline and a rain-soaked, sleepless night did exactly what fear does best, and stitched together a coherent, terrifying narrative out of nothing more than shadows, bad signal, and my own racing heart. Or maybe, and this is the one I still can't quite set down, even now, some places really do have something that waits for the right kind of silence, something that answers exactly the way you call to it, and simply hadn't finished closing the distance yet by the time I ran. Here's what I took from that mountain pass. The thing I didn't expect a stalled motorcycle to teach me. Not every signal in the dark is asking to be answered. And sometimes the kindest, safest thing you can do for yourself is let a light keep flashing, without ever telling it you saw it. I still ride. I still love the road more than almost anything else in my life. But I carry a satellite communicator now, no matter how short the trip, and I've never once, in 3 years since, answered a stranger's light in the dark again. Not with my flashlight, not with my headlights, not with anything. If this one stuck with you, stay close. The next story I have waiting is one that starts in a place you'd never expect trouble to find you. And by the end, I promise you'll understand exactly why I still can't drive past cornfields at night without turning the radio up. I used to think grief had a shape. That if I just stayed busy enough, kept my hands moving, I could keep it folded up small enough to carry around without anyone noticing. That's the real reason I drove 6 hours to my grandfather's farm in Iowa last October. Not because he needed help with the harvest, though he did, but because I needed somewhere to put myself, where the walls didn't remember my mother's voice. She'd been gone 8 months by then. Long enough that people stopped asking how I was doing. Not long enough that I'd stopped reaching for my phone to call her every Sunday before I caught myself. Grandpa Earl's place sits at the end of a gravel road so long you forget the highway exists. Corn on both sides, taller than my car, right up until the porch light. He hugged me too hard when I got there, the way men his age do when words feel like too much work, and said, "You look like her," which was either the kindest or cruelest thing anyone had said to me all year. I still haven't decided which. The first night, I couldn't sleep. Jet-lagged from grief more than travel, I told myself. Around 11, I heard it, a low, rolling hum drifting in through the window screen. Not wind. Wind doesn't have a rhythm. This rose and fell like breath, like something enormous exhaling somewhere out past the porch light, out where the corn swallowed the dark hole. I lay there for a long time, telling myself it was pipes, or the old water tower, or tinnitus from the drive. Eventually I got up and looked out the window. Nothing but corn, stretching flat and endless under a sky too full of stars for a city girl to feel comfortable under. In the morning I asked Grandpa about it over coffee, half joking, half not. "Wind through the stalks," he said, not looking up from his eggs. "Does it every fall once the ears dry out? You'll get used to it." I wanted to believe him. He'd farmed this land for 51 years. If anyone would know the difference between wind and something else, it'd be him. So I let it go, the way you let go of a lot of things, when you're tired and sad and don't want one more thing to be wrong. What I didn't tell him was that just before I fell asleep that first night, right at the edge of it, I thought I heard a melody underneath the humming. Just a few notes. Familiar in a way that made my chest hurt before I even understood why. It wasn't until the second night that I let myself admit what it reminded me of. My mother used to hum before she sang, always the same 2 bars, like she was tuning herself before the actual song came out. She did it at the stove, in the car, folding laundry. It was so constant growing up that I stopped hearing it as music at all. It was just the sound of her being nearby, the way some houses have a particular creak in the floor that means someone's home. The second night, lying in my childhood summer's bedroom with the window cracked for air, I heard those same 2 bars, hummed, from somewhere out in the corn. I sat straight up in bed. "It's grief," I told myself. Grief does strange things to the ears. You hear a door close and think it's her keys hitting the bowl by the entryway. You catch a stranger's perfume in a grocery store and have to grip the cart to stay upright. The brain fills silence with whatever it's missing most. That's not a haunting. That's just Tuesday for people like me. But the humming kept going. Past the 2 bars, into the verse, into an actual melody now. Rising and falling with a shape too deliberate to be wine moving through dry stalks, no matter what Grandpa said. I recognized it fully by the 3rd repetition. A lullaby. The one she used to sing when I was small enough to still ask for it. Something about a boat and a river and coming home safe. I got out of bed and went outside in my socks, which I regret, because Iowa gravel does not care about your grief. The corn came right up to the edge of the yard, a wall of it, black-green in the moonlight, and the humming was definitely coming from inside it. Not at the edge, but deep, maybe 30 or 40 rows in. I stood at the boundary where mowed grass met stalk, my heart doing something uncomfortable in my chest, and I called out, "Hello?" The humming stopped, not faded. Stopped, the way a radio does when you turn the dial too far and the signal just cuts. I stood there for probably 3 full minutes, ankles freezing, waiting. Nothing. Not even the ordinary night sounds you'd expect. No crickets, no rustle, no wind. Even though there'd clearly been wind enough to make a farmer's daughter believe in the wind through the stalks explanation the night before. Just silence so complete it felt like the field was holding its breath along with me. Then, from somewhere far off toward the house, I heard the porch door creak, and Grandpa's voice, low. "Clara, that you out there?" I said yes. I did not tell him what I'd heard. I did not tell him that as I turned to walk back, I was almost certain. Almost. I want to stress almost, because certainty is a dangerous thing to claim about something you can't prove. That the corn nearest me had been swaying gently. In a night with no wind at all. I didn't sleep much after that. I lay there running through explanations like inventory. Tired mind, unfamiliar house. The particular acoustics of open farmland carrying sound from a neighbor's radio or a distant road. Iowa is flatter than you'd believe until you've stood in it. Sound travels strange out here, Grandpa had told me once, years ago, when I was a kid asking why I could hear a train that had to be miles away. Maybe that was all this was. Some trucker's radio bouncing off a grain silo 3 farms over, warped by distance into something that sounded, to a grieving woman's exhausted ears, like her dead mother's lullaby. I almost had myself convinced by breakfast. Grandpa was quiet that morning in a way that didn't match his usual talkativeness. He kept glancing at me over his coffee like he wanted to say something and kept deciding against it. Finally, buttering toast without looking up, he said, "Your grandmother used to hear things out there too. First autumn after her sister passed." I asked what kind of things. I was quiet a beat too long. "Wind," he said. "Just wind." But his jaw was tight when he said it, and he changed the subject to the combine needing a new belt before I could push further. That day I helped him in the fields, actual daylight work, which felt good. Physical, simple, nothing to overthink. The corn towered over both of us, dry husks whispering against my forearms as we walked the rows checking moisture levels for harvest. In broad daylight, it was just corn. Ordinary, agricultural, boring corn. I laughed at myself a little, out there in the sun, for having stood shivering at its edge the night before like a kid scared of the dark. That's the thing about daylight. It lies to you just as much as the dark does. It just lies in the other direction, around row 40, deep enough in that the farmhouse had disappeared behind the stalks. Grandpa stopped walking. Just stopped, mid-sentence, staring at something low in the row beside him. I asked what was wrong. I didn't answer right away. Then he said, too casually, "Deer bed down here sometimes," and kept walking, faster than before, like he wanted to put distance between us and whatever he'd seen. I looked myself on the way back, when he wasn't watching. It wasn't a deer bed. It was a small, neat circle of flattened stalks, maybe 3 feet across, corn bent outward from the center like something had knelt there. In the very middle of it, pressed into the dirt, was a scrap of pale fabric, half buried, that I didn't stop to examine closely enough that first time. I wish I had. I think about that a lot now. What I would have done differently, if I'd known on day 2 what I wouldn't understand until day 5. That night, the humming didn't start at 11. It started the moment I turned off my lamp. I lay in the dark, and this time the melody didn't build slowly. It was just there, already mid-verse, like it had been waiting for the exact moment my light went out to pick up where it left off. My whole body went rigid, get under the blanket. Every rational explanation I'd stacked up over the last 2 days, distant radios, wind acoustics, grief hallucinations, felt suddenly very thin, like a coat that had seemed warm enough in the store and wasn't. I made myself lie still. I made myself breathe slow. I told myself, this is a farm. Farms have night sounds. You are a city person who doesn't know what a farm sounds like. This is not a mystery. This is ignorance. The humming stopped mid-note, and a voice said my name. Not the humming shaped like my name I might have written off as pattern matching, the way you hear your name in white noise if you listen hard enough. An actual, clear, unmistakable Clara. Soft, almost tender, pitched exactly like someone leaning down to wake a sleeping child gently instead of shaking them. I did not move for what felt like a very long time. My heart was doing something violent and uneven in my chest. When I finally worked up the nerve to check the window, there was nothing there but corn and stars, the same as every night. The silence that followed was the worst part. A silence so total, it felt curated, deliberate, like the whole field was standing very still and watching to see what I'd do next. I didn't go outside that night. I want that on record. Whatever else I did wrong in this story. That night I had the sense to stay in my bed with the door locked and the lamp back on, telling myself with a shaking voice that it was a dream, a trick of a tired mind. Anything but what some small ancient part of my brain was already insisting it was. In the morning, I found Grandpa already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug he wasn't drinking from. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "You heard it," he said. Not a question. I told him everything. The voice, my name, the way the silence afterward had felt like something listening back. I expected him to reach for the wind explanation again. He didn't. Instead, he got very quiet. And then he told me about my great-aunt Ruth, who I'd never met, who died in that same cornfield 30 years before I was born. In circumstances the family didn't discuss, and Grandpa clearly still didn't want to. And he told me something else. Something about the little flattened circles that show up in the corn, some autumns, always with something left in the center. Always something that belonged to somebody who was still alive to miss it. I asked him what he meant by that. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was deciding whether I could handle the answer. "The field doesn't take deer," he said. "Never has." I wouldn't say more than that. I pushed, asked what he meant by takes, asked what happened to Ruth, asked why he'd let me sleep here 3 nights without warning me any of this. But he just shook his head and said, "Some things are better left in the ground where they settled." And then he got up and went out to check the grain bins, which was as close as Grandpa Earl ever came to ending a conversation by walking away from it. I spent that day telling myself I should just leave. Pack the car, drive the 6 hours home, forget the humming, forget the circle in the corn, forget the scrap of fabric I still hadn't properly looked at. It would have been the smart thing to do. I want to be honest and say that the reason I didn't wasn't bravery. It was that some part of me, the part still raw from 8 months of missing my mother so badly it felt physical, had heard my name sung in her lullaby's melody, and some small, foolish, grief-starved corner of my heart didn't want to run from that. It wanted to know. That afternoon, while Grandpa napped, I went back to row 40 on my own. The circle was still there, though it looked different in daylight, wider than I remembered. The flattened stalks yellowed at the edges, like something had drained the green out of them. I knelt at the center and finally picked up the scrap of fabric. It was a handkerchief, small, cotton, yellowed with age and dirt, with an embroidered corner, pale pink thread, a little girl's careful, uneven stitching. A single letter. See, I sat back on my heels in the dirt, staring at it, and a specific, very old memory surfaced whole. Me, 8 years old, at this same farm, embroidering my first initial onto a handkerchief at my mother's kitchen table while she hummed that same lullaby over my shoulder, correcting my stitches. I remembered losing it that same summer, out here, in this field, chasing lightning bugs at dusk while the grown-ups called me in for dinner. I remembered crying about it. I remembered being told it was just a handkerchief, that things get lost, that I'd forget about it in a week. I had forgotten about it for 18 years, until it was sitting in my palm in a field 30 rows deep, in a circle of corn that doesn't take deer. That's when I noticed the silence again. That same total, listening silence from 2 nights before. Except now. It was daylight, and the sun was still up, and there was no reasonable version of wind through the stalks that explained why every single blade of corn around me had gone completely, perfectly still. I stood up too fast. My vision swam. And somewhere behind me, from deep in the rows where I hadn't walked, I heard, very softly, 2 familiar bars of a lullaby, hummed by a voice that was almost my mother's. I did not turn around to look. I ran. I don't remember most of the sprint back through the rows. I remember corn leaves cutting at my arms, the handkerchief crushed in my fist, my own breathing louder in my ears than anything else. And then, underneath that, the humming keeping perfect pace with me. Not chasing exactly, matching. Like it wasn't trying to catch me so much as make sure I knew it could, whenever it wanted to. I burst out of the field into the yard so fast I fell, scraping both palms on the gravel, and when I looked back, the corn was just corn again, swaying normally now, an ordinary breeze moving through it like nothing at all had happened. Grandpa found me there minutes later, sitting in the dirt, shaking. And for once, he didn't try to explain it away. He just helped me up and didn't let go of my arm the whole walk back to the house. That evening, he finally told me the rest of it, in pieces, like each part cost him something to say. Ruth had been 26 when she disappeared into that field. My age exactly, a detail he said almost apologetically, as though he'd been hoping I wouldn't notice. She'd been humming that same lullaby the night before, the one their mother used to sing, the one that had apparently been passed down and half forgotten and was somehow, impossibly, still out there in the corn 30 years later. Still remembering the words nobody living was supposed to still know. They'd found one of her shoes in a flattened circle 3 days after she vanished. Never found the rest of her. The county called it an accident. Maybe a wild animal, maybe she'd just run off. The kind of shrug an investigation gives a case it has no interest in solving. Grandpa never believed any of it. He'd heard the humming himself, the autumn after, and every autumn since, though he swore it had never called his name. Only hers. And now, apparently, only mine. Why now? I asked him. Why me? Why this year? And he didn't have an answer. Only a theory he offered, like it embarrassed him to say out loud. That whatever was out there fed on something, and that something was grief. That it had gone quiet all those years, because there'd been no one freshly grieving enough to hear it properly. And that my mother's death 8 months ago had, without my knowing it, made me exactly the kind of listener it had been waiting for. I wanted to laugh at that. I couldn't. That night I didn't sleep at the house at all. Grandpa insisted we both stay in the truck, engine running, parked as far from the field as the driveway allowed, doors locked, the two of us saying almost nothing to each other for hours. Around midnight, the humming started again, faint even at that distance, and this time it didn't stop at 2 bars or a verse. It went on, and threaded all through it, over and over, so soft. I might have imagined it if Grandpa hadn't gone pale and gripped the steering wheel at the exact same moment I heard it. My name, sung like the end of the lullaby, had always been about me. I left the next morning before sunrise, and I haven't been back since. Grandpa didn't ask me to stay longer, which told me more than anything he could have said out loud. He hugged me at the car, the same too hard way he had 4 days earlier. Except this time he held on a few seconds past comfortable, and when he pulled back his eyes were wet in a way I pretended not to notice, for his sake. I still have the handkerchief. I don't know why I kept it instead of leaving it in that field where I found it. Maybe because it was mine before it was anything else's. Maybe because some stubborn part of me needed proof, afterward, that I hadn't simply invented 4 sleepless nights out of grief and a farmhouse's strange acoustics. It sits in a drawer I don't open often, and on the rare nights I do think about it, I notice I still can't hum that lullaby myself anymore. I've tried. My throat just closes around it, every time. Like my body has decided some songs aren't safe to finish. I've turned the whole thing over more times than I can count, looking for a shape that makes sense. There's a version where it's grief, pure and simple. The mind conjuring a lost mother's voice out of wind and loneliness, and an old childhood memory, finally surfacing after being buried 18 years. There's a version where it's something about that specific patch of land, some acoustic quirk of flat farmland and dry husks that Grandpa's family has been frightening itself with for 2 generations. A ghost story that became self-fulfilling the moment enough, grieving people went looking for a voice in the corn and found exactly what they expected to find. And there's the version I don't like to sit with for long. The one where something out there really has been waiting, patient across 30 years and 2 generations of women, for someone sad enough to answer when it finally called her name. I don't know which one is true. I'm not sure I want to. What I do know is that Ruth was 26. That she disappeared the autumn after losing someone. That I am 26, and I had lost someone. And I stood at the edge of that field 4 nights in a row telling myself it was nothing. Right up until the night it used a lullaby my mother sang to lure me toward an answer I still don't have. The lesson I keep coming back to, if there is one, if a story like this is even allowed to have a lesson instead of just a scar, is that grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't see coming. It doesn't just live in the obvious places, the anniversaries and the empty chair at dinner. It opens doors you didn't know were doors. Whatever waits behind them, real or imagined, knows exactly which voice to borrow to get you to open them wider. I don't sleep with my window cracked anymore. Not anywhere. Not even in my own apartment 2 states away from any cornfield. And some nights, when it's quiet enough. I swear I can still hear 2 bars of a melody at the very edge of hearing. Always right as I'm falling asleep, always gone the second I try to listen closer. I tell myself it's nothing. I've gotten very good this past year at telling myself things are nothing.